It was a text message I almost didn't read. My phone buzzed while I was watching the evening news, and I almost left it on the coffee table the way I usually do after 8 o'clock. But something made me pick it up. Call it habit. Call it instinct. I don't know what to call it anymore, honestly. I just know that if I had set that phone down, things might have gone very differently. The text was from my daughter-in-law, my son's wife. Ex-wife now, I have to keep reminding myself. They finalized everything 14 months ago after 3 years of what I can only describe as a slow unraveling. Her name is Pauline. I'll be honest with you. I tried to like her. For 17 years I tried. Some people you just never quite reach. The text said, "You need to come get the rest of Marcus's things from the garage. Do it by Saturday or I'm donating everything. I'm not your son's storage unit, Marcus. My son? He's 41 years old and he asked me, his 63-year-old father, to handle this because he was 2 states away for work and couldn't get back in time. He'd already taken the important things when he moved out. The stuff in the garage was mostly tools, some boxes of old baseball cards, a few things that belonged to my late wife. Things that mattered, not to Pauline, but to us. I said I'd go Sunday morning. She confirmed Sunday morning. She confirmed Sunday. That was the agreement. I drove out there Saturday night instead. I still can't fully explain why. I've turned it over in my mind 100 times since. My son asked me to go Sunday. Pauline said Sunday. There was no reason to go a day early. But I was restless that whole Saturday. I kept sitting down and standing back up. I tried to read, tried to watch television, couldn't settle. Something I couldn't name was pulling at me the way a sound just below hearing pulls at you. You don't know what it is, but you know something's there. I told myself I'd just drive by. Make sure the garage was accessible. Maybe text Pauline to confirm the access code still worked. It was almost 9:30 at night when I turned onto their street. The house is a colonial, on a quarter-acre lot in a suburb about 40 minutes from where I live. Nice street. Big oak trees, the kind of neighborhood that looks peaceful because you can't see inside the houses. There were lights on, which I expected. Pauline's car was in the driveway. There was another car I didn't recognize, parked at the curb. A dark green SUV with a cracked taillight. I pulled up 2 houses down the way you do when you haven't decided whether you're staying. Then I heard it. At first I thought it was a television. A sound coming from somewhere around the side of the house, low and intermittent. I sat in the car for a moment and listened. It wasn't a television, it was a voice. Small. Uneven. The kind of sound a child makes when they've been crying so long they've moved past crying into something quieter and more desperate. I have 2 grandchildren, my son's kids. Nora is 9, Danny is 7. I got out of the car. I walked toward the side of the house where the sound was coming from. There's a window. Well, there, just below ground level, that looks into the basement. I don't know why I knew to go there. I just walked toward the sound, and that's where it led me. I crouched down beside the window well and looked in. The basement light was on. Just the one overhead bulb that swings when you walk too hard on the floor above it. It was enough to see by. And what I saw made my chest go cold in a way that had nothing to do with the night air. Danny was sitting on the concrete floor with his back against the wall underneath the utility sink. He had his knees pulled up to his chest. His wrists were bound together with a zip tie and a short length of cord attached to the pipe that ran under the sink. Not handcuffs, but the effect was the same. He was wearing just his pajama shirt and socks, no pants, and he was rocking, slowly, the way a child rocks when there's nothing else left to do. I think I called his name. I must have, because he looked up. His face turned toward the window, and I could see it had been crying for a long time. I went around to the back door. I didn't knock. I tried the handle and it was locked. I went to the garage side door and the code still worked. I got through to the basement from the interior staircase. Danny heard me on the stairs and made a sound I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It wasn't relief exactly. It was more like the sound of something that had been wound impossibly tight, suddenly being allowed to ease a single degree. Grandpa. That was all. Just Grandpa. I got down on the floor next to him, and I worked the cord loose from the pipe. The zip tie I had to cut with my keys, which took too long, and he kept flinching, and I kept telling him I was being careful. I was being so careful. When his hands came free, he didn't move right away. He just held them in his lap and looked at them. I asked him if he was hurt. He shook his head. Then he nodded. Then he said, "My wrists hurt." I asked him how long he'd been down here. He said he didn't know. He said it felt like a long time. I looked around the basement. There was a plastic cup near his feet with maybe an inch of water left in it. No food that I could see. A folded towel on the floor. I noticed the towel had been folded and unfolded several times from the way it was creased, the way you'd fold and unfold something just to have something to do with your hands. I asked him where his sister was. He looked up at me then. Really looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and there was something in them I wasn't prepared for. Not fear exactly. More like a warning. He said, "Grandpa, don't go upstairs yet." I asked him why. He said, "She doesn't want anyone to know about Nora." I felt the cold come back into my chest. I asked him what he meant. I asked him what was happening with Nora. He was quiet for a long moment. A child's quiet. The kind that isn't peaceful. The kind that's filled with calculation about how much to say and what will happen when it's said. Then he said, "She's been up there for a really long time." In the room, Mum said she's been punished. But it's been so long, Grandpa. It's been so long. I asked him what room. He looked at the ceiling. He said, "The one they keep locked. I should tell you about the house. The Colonial has 4 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. The back bedroom, the one that was supposed to be a guest room, had a lock on the outside of the door. Marcus mentioned it to me once, about a year before the divorce. He said Pauline put it there because she said Nora kept getting into things. I thought it was strange. I didn't say enough about it. That's something I have to live with. I told Danny I needed him to stay where he was. I told him I would be right back. He grabbed my arm. He said, "Don't let her know you know. She gets worse when she knows someone knows." A 7-year-old told me that. My grandson, that is the sentence that keeps me awake. I went upstairs. Pauline was in the living room with a man from the green SUV. I heard their voices before I turned the corner, laughing. The television was on, but nobody was watching it. There were wine glasses on the coffee table. It was a normal Saturday evening in every way that mattered to them. I walked in, and Pauline saw me and her face went through 3 expressions in about a second and a half. Surprise, anger, something else, something careful, something that was already calculating. She said, "What are you doing here?" We said Sunday. I looked at her. I looked at the man on the couch who I'd never seen before in my life. Then I looked at the ceiling. The bedroom at the back of the house was directly above us. I said, "Where is Nora?" She said, "She's in her room." I said, "Which room?" A pause. Brief. The kind of pause that lasts exactly long enough to put on the right expression. She said, "Her room." She went to bed early. "Why? Are you—" I walked past her. She said my name. She said, "Wait." Then she said my name again, louder. I went up the stairs. The hallway was dark. 2 of the bedroom doors were open. One was Pauline's. One was Danny's, empty now. The bathroom light was on with the door cracked the way it is in a house with young children, so there's never total darkness. The door at the end of the hall was closed. The lock on the outside was a simple sliding barrel bolt. It was thrown. I slid the bolt back and opened the door. The room was dark. I felt along the wall for the light switch and found it. Nora was sitting in the corner between the window and the wall, on a folded blanket, with her back against the baseboard. She was wearing clothes that weren't pajamas, Just clothes, like she'd been placed there during the day and hadn't changed. There was a plate on the floor that had been empty long enough to be dry. A plastic water bottle, empty. A small pile of library books she'd arranged by herself in a kind of wall. She looked at me when the light came on. She didn't make a sound. She looked the way children look when they've been managing alone long enough that they've stopped expecting help. Still. Careful. Like an animal that's learned to take up less space. I said her name. I said, "Nora, sweetheart. It's Grandpa." She blinked. Then she said, in a voice that was dry and smaller than a 9-year-old's voice should be, "I knew someone would come eventually." I found out later it had been 9 days. 9 days in that room. In and out. Pauline would let her out for meals sometimes, supervised. Let her use the bathroom, but locked her back in. Locked her back in for being difficult. That was the word Pauline used later when the officers were there and she was trying to explain. She was being difficult, and she needed to learn consequences. 9 days. Nora had kept track. She'd found a ballpoint pen under the radiator, the kind that gets kicked and forgotten. She'd written the days on the back of the baseboard behind her pile of books. Tiny marks in the paint, where no one would look. When I found them, I stood in that hallway for a moment with both children, and I thought about every Sunday afternoon pickup, every school play, every birthday party, every ordinary moment when I had looked at these kids and not seen what was happening to them in the hours I wasn't there. Pauline came up the stairs behind me. The man from the couch had apparently decided this was not his problem, because I heard the front door close. She said, "This is not what it looks like." I turned around. I looked at her for a long moment. 63 years old, and I have been angry before. I have lost people. I've had bad days and bad years. But I had never in my life felt the particular thing I felt standing in that hallway looking at my daughter-in-law of 17 years. I said very quietly, "Don't speak." I called 911. I want to be accurate about what happened next because accuracy matters to me. I know the instinct when you read something like this is to want a version where the villain gets what's coming to them immediately and completely. The truth is messier. The officers came. 2 of them at first, then more. There were questions, there were separate rooms, there was a child services worker who arrived about an hour after and sat with Nora and Danny in the kitchen while I waited in the hallway. Pauline talked the entire time, I'll give her that. She had explanations for everything. The lock was for Nora's safety. She'd been sleepwalking. The cord in the basement was to prevent Danny from going outside at night unsupervised. She said it calmly. She said it with the particular confidence of someone who has said it to herself so many times it has taken on the texture of truth. The child services worker, a woman named Eugenia who looked like she'd heard every version of every story, asked Nora where the pen marks were. Nora showed her. Nora showed her without any prompting, without any encouragement, just stood up and moved the books aside and pointed. I watched Eugenia count the marks. I watched her face. She didn't say anything to anyone except to step into the hallway and make a phone call. I called my son at 11:15 that night. He was in a hotel in Nashville. I had to say the words to him over the phone, and I want you to understand that is one of the hardest things I have done. There is no right way to say to your child, while you were away, while we all went about our days, something was happening to your children, and none of us knew. He drove through the night. Got there at 6 in the morning. Nora and Danny were with me by then. The child services worker had placed them with me temporarily, pending the investigation. They were asleep in my guest room when Marcus arrived. He stood in the doorway of that room for a long time. I stood with him. He said, "I should have seen it." I said, "I should have seen it too." There are things fathers say to their sons and things they can't say. We stood there in the dark watching 2 children breathe and neither of us spoke for a while. And that silence said everything we couldn't. The investigation took several months. Pauline was charged. Felony child endangerment. Unlawful imprisonment. The charges sound clean and final the way legal language always does, like they capture the thing they're describing. They don't. There is no language that captures what a 9-year-old looks like when she has stopped expecting anyone to come. The trial was difficult. Pauline's defense argued the marks on the baseboard could have been made by Nora at any time, not necessarily during a confinement. They argued there was no physical harm, no injuries, no medical evidence of neglect beyond the obvious. The prosecutor had Eugenia's testimony. She had the photographs. She had the child services reports going back further than any of us knew, a previous call made by Nora's teacher 14 months before that had been investigated and closed without action. The teacher had noticed Nora falling asleep in class, had noticed who sometimes came in without having eaten breakfast, had noticed things the way teachers notice things when they're paying attention. That case had been closed. It got opened again. Pauline was convicted. She received 4 years. She'll likely serve less. I sat in that courtroom and I listened to the sentence. And I thought about 9 marks on the back of a baseboard. I thought about a cup with an inch of water. I thought about a 7-year-old telling me she gets worse when she knows someone knows. 4 years. The man who'd been on the couch that Saturday night was never charged with anything. He didn't know, as far as anyone could prove. He was just a man having a glass of wine on a Saturday night. He's gone now. No part of this story. Nora and Danny are with Marcus now. He moved back, got a local position, took a pay cut to do it, didn't discuss it with me or with anyone. Just did it. I'm proud of him for that. Proud in the way that's mixed with sorrow because it shouldn't have had to be a decision he needed to make. Nora has a therapist. She goes twice a week. She doesn't talk to me much about what happens in those sessions, and I don't ask. She talks to me about other things. About books. About a girl at school she's been tentatively becoming friends with. About the cardinal that comes to my bird feeder, and whether it's the same cardinal or different cardinals, and how you'd even know. She is 9 years old, and she is a child who learned to be cautious in a way that children shouldn't have to learn. And she is doing the careful work of unlearning it. I watch her do it. I don't always know what to do except be there, which maybe is enough, which maybe is all any of us have. Danny has good days and harder days. He doesn't like enclosed spaces now in the way he didn't before. He doesn't like having his wrists touched. These are things we know and we work around and we don't make a big thing of, which the therapist said is right. You acknowledge it, you accommodate it, you don't center it. He's 7 years old, and he still reaches for my hand when we walk across a parking lot, and that means everything to me. I think about that Saturday night a lot. About the text I almost didn't read. About the decision to drive by that I can't fully explain. I am 63 years old, and I have learned that the feeling you can't name is sometimes the most important feeling you'll ever have. Not instinct exactly, not logic. Something in between those things that knows what the words don't yet. I have learned that children will tell you something is wrong without telling you something is wrong. That they will show you in the spaces between sentences, in the way they hold their bodies, in the way they go quiet at certain moments, in the careful distance they keep from certain rooms, that if you are paying attention, really paying attention the way we mean to but don't always manage, you can sometimes catch it. I didn't catch it for 14 months, I have to be honest about that, but I went on a Saturday night when I was supposed to go on Sunday, for reasons I still can't entirely explain, and that made the difference. I don't say that as a comfort, I say it as a fact, and I say the rest of it too. The teacher's report that went nowhere, the lock on the door that I noticed and didn't push on hard enough, the years of ordinary Sunday afternoons when I shook hands with a woman who was hurting my grandchildren. And I drove home and I watched the evening news. I say all of it because the whole truth is the only thing worth saying. Nora knew someone would come eventually. She was 9 years old and she folded her blanket and she stacked her books and she made her marks on the baseboard and she waited because she had decided to believe that eventually someone would come. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worth that belief. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any grand philosophical way. Just the plain, unglamorous version of it that shows up in real life. The idea that what we do and what we fail to do both have weight, both land somewhere, both leave a mark. Poorly made choices over a long stretch of time. Small ones at first probably. A lock on a door. A raised voice that crossed a line. Then bigger ones, until locking a 9-year-old in a room for 9 days became something she could explain calmly to a police officer as consequences. That is what happens when a person stops being checked by anything, by empathy, by accountability, by the plain discomfort of knowing that someone else is watching. She had convinced herself that what she was doing had a justification. That is not a defense. That is the most dangerous kind of thinking there is. And I have to include myself in the accounting, because I walked into that house on Sunday afternoons for years. I shook her hand. I watched those children at birthday parties and holidays and ordinary weekends, and I noticed things, the lock on the door, the way Nora sometimes went still when certain topics came up, the way Danny always seemed to be watching for something, and I filed those things away as nothing, as family quirks, as things that weren't my place to push on. That is what I mean when I say that doing nothing also has weight. What I know now, at 63, that I wish I had understood at 40, is that paying attention is not passive, real attention. The kind that notices the small things, the quiet things, the things a child can't say directly but is showing you anyway. That takes courage. It takes the willingness to say something uncomfortable, to ask the question that might cause a scene, to trust the feeling you can't name over the explanation that's being handed to you. Nora had that courage. A 9-year-old had the kind of quiet, sustained courage that most adults never have to call on. She made her marks on the baseboard. She stacked her books. She waited. She had decided, with no evidence that it was true, on nothing but the faith that came from somewhere deep inside her, that eventually someone would come. That is not stubbornness. That is not luck. That is a kind of intelligence about the world that no one taught her. She arrived at it herself, in a locked room with a borrowed pen. I think about what Marcus did when he found out. No deliberation, no long conversation about pros and cons. He took a pay cut and came home. That is what love looks like when it stops being comfortable and becomes a decision. That is what I want Danny to remember when he is older, and someone he cares about needs him to show up in a way that costs him something. The thing I keep coming back to is this. The people who hurt Nora and Danny counted on silence. They counted on the fact that children don't have language for certain things, that adults are busy, that families absorb their own damage quietly and keep it inside the house. What broke that silence was small. A text I almost didn't read. A drive I couldn't explain. A window well at ground level. Small things matter. The small act of paying attention. The small act of trusting the feeling that doesn't have a name yet. The small act of a child stacking books against a wall and deciding to believe in something she couldn't see. That is what I want to carry forward, not the horror of what happened, though I'll carry that too, I don't have a choice, but the lesson underneath it. That showing up matters. That noticing matters. That the people who need us most are often the quietest about needing us. I'm still learning that. At 63 years old, I am still learning it.